Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again today doing another video. The subject of today's video is going to be on Game of Thrones because I am still going on my little mini series on Game of Thrones because it's a lull in the NBA season and I just feel like talking about one of my favorite series, books and show, which is Game of Thrones, which will have the final season coming out here in a couple of weeks. And I just want to talk about it, talk about a few different things, and have a good time changing it up a bit. So the subject of today's video is going to be on me ranking from worst to best every season thus far, seasons 1 through 7 of Game of Thrones. Of course, there will be spoilers, so if you don't want to know what happens in the most current season or something like that, or if you're still working your way through the show, maybe don't watch this whole thing because there will be spoilers ahead for what goes on throughout the entire course of the series. But that being said, let's get into it. So, starting off as my least favorite season, we have season 2 of the show. So, season 2, some of the main plot lines, or probably the best episode or moment, is the Battle of Blackwater Bay. Tyrion launching the wildfire onto Stannis' fleet. That's a really cool part. Aside from that, there's nothing that this season really offers to me. So, as far as going through some of the main plots, you've got Sansa sort of just stuck in uh, King's Landing, whining a lot, and Joffrey being a real jerk to her. You got Joffrey, who's now king. Ned Stark is no longer fighting him or like opposing his rule because he's dead. So Joffrey's just being a real jerk on the throne and abusing people really badly, including Sansa. You've got the War of Five Kings that's going strong. So you've got Tywin basically leading the Baratheon Joffrey branch of the war. You've got Stannis, who's introduced to the show, who's fighting with the Red Woman in Davos, and they're kind of leading his army and trying to figure stuff out. You've got Renly Baratheon, who also thinks he would be a better king than his older brother, so he is declared for the throne. Then you've got Robb Stark in the north, who wants to secede from the Seven Kingdoms and have the north be its own independent place. And then you have Theon Greyjoy's dad. I don't remember what his first name is, but the head of House Greyjoy, who was trying to also secede, and they were kind of like pillaging the north while Robb's army was in the south. So yes, you get some like strategy and stuff, but a lot of this season is just boring. It's a lot of like Robb and Catelyn talking about strategy, um, and like trying to use Walder Frey's bridge. That's a big part of the season, which it comes back to be more important later in the series. But as far as just season 2, it's kind of a boring part. You have Robb kind of falling for that Talisa Stark, or I think he just meets her. He doesn't necessarily fall for her. You got Catelyn Stark kind of just sitting around Robb's camp. You've got Jaime Lannister just sitting in prison for all of season 2, doing nothing really. Cersei's just sitting in King's Landing, kind of being Cersei. Tyrion is Hand of the King. That's probably the highlight of the season, seeing how he interacts with Cersei and Joffrey. And then you've got Arya with the Brotherhood Without Banners, and in Harrenhal for a bit, interacting with Tywin, and she's pretending to be a nobody when she's a Stark. And she's not really doing anything though. Jon Snow's up at the wall. He's starting to go out and kind of do the recon stuff to find walkers because they're all looking for Benjen. I think that's mid season 2. But really, I don't know. There's just not much to this season for me. I don't find much interesting. You got the Hound, who at the end of season 2 abandons Joffrey. I love that part because I love the Hound. Um, and finally, he gets away from that terrible family and terrible uh, commander in Joffrey, I guess you'd call him, his commander or his boss, so to speak. You get introduced to Brienne of Tarth. Man, I don't really care for her character. And then you got the whole Renly gets murdered plotline. That's pretty interesting, but that's also like a 5 minute like thing that happens, and then it's just over, and you're kind of like, okay, Stannis gets Renly's army, and then it's all like nobody cares after that. So it's what I would call like a connector season, in that it's kind of like sweeping up from season 1 and getting us ready for season 3, but it itself doesn't have much new or groundbreaking stuff to offer. My next season here, getting a little bit better, but still one of my least favorite seasons, is season 5 of the show. So this season marks after Tyrion has gotten away from King's Landing. He's now in Essos. Jorah Mormont captures him for a bit of time. Oh, back to season 1. Daenerys like is in that city called Karth and does nothing. and eventually gets a little bit of forces and leaves Karth. And there's just a lot of run around and nothing really happens. But sorry, back to season 5. So I think a big thing is Tyrion going to Essos with Varys. Tyrion gets captured by Jorah. They kind of run around for a bit. Eventually, they meet Daenerys, but then she gets like whisked up by a bunch of dragons, and or by one of her dragons, and then she's off. So she doesn't even really meet Tyrion. It's just him and Jorah playing like an odd couple, so to speak, trying to get um, to back to Daenerys after Jorah's kind of been disgraced. You've got Jon Snow, who is increasing his efforts to like welcome the wildlings into Westeros and into the Wall, but everyone's kind of pushing back on him for it. And then he gets killed at the end of the season, which I always hated that part. But Hardhome is a cool episode, but I found him getting killed to just be terrible and like just didn't even make sense really when it happened to me, like why they would really hate him that much. But it happened, and I don't know. He just seemed really depressed that season because Ygritte was gone, and he didn't really have much. He was interacting with Stannis a lot, and it was kind of, I don't know, just flat to me. This season marks the death of Stannis, by the way, who uh, keeps losing forces, burns his daughter Shireen, which I think everybody universally hated, and then half of his forces left him at one point, and then he went to fight Ramsay Bolton, but he didn't really have anybody left to fight for him, and so he lost pretty easily. And then Brienne of Tarth is for some reason around, and she comes along and kills him, which seems like a really lucky thing that she'd somehow find him. But whatever, it's a suspension of disbelief when you're watching a TV show. But he kind of ends in a really lame way in that I know actually in the books he's still alive, but I feel like the writers had kind of written him into a corner and didn't know how to get him out of it. So they're like, well, I guess we have to kill off Stannis. And so they did. And I feel like they could have done a lot more with his character, but the show was moving along and they didn't really know what to do with him. So they just killed him off, which is a luxury of a show like Game of Thrones where you can make like a really dramatic moment out of killing somebody like him off, which they kind of got a cool ending for him in that he was like, I'm going down with the ship and not going down without a fight sort of thing. But ultimately, they could have used him way better. As far as stuff in King's Landing, you have Tommen as king, and you have Cersei kind of promoting the High Sparrow, and then you kind of have this infighting between Cersei and Marjorie Tyrell. That's basically all that goes on in King's Landing this season. You have Cersei get her hair chopped off, get thrown in that dungeon, and people keep like hitting her and stuff like that, and then eventually she does the Walk of Atonement where she's naked. Now, I think everybody kind of hates Cersei, but like you also felt kind of bad for her having to do that naked walk. Um, and I don't know, it just didn't seem like the right, like I think the show was sort of trying to give us a catharsis and like a moment where we felt good about Cersei finally getting her due, but it was like a weird way to do it. Like I didn't gain any like satisfaction from seeing Cersei have to do that because I feel like in retrospect, like getting a few tomatoes thrown at you while walking naked is like pretty light compared to like getting tortured or something like that. Not that I want to see people get tortured, but just like in the grand scheme of things, right when she gets done doing that, she starts torturing that evil High Septon lady right when she gets back with the um actually it's later on in the show, but I just feel like it really wasn't much of a punishment, honestly, and nothing really interesting happens in that season. And Tommen's just bopping around, doing his thing, being like a 14-year-old king, doesn't really know what's going on or who to listen to, and nothing interesting there particularly. Daenerys is still over in Essos doing her thing, collecting an army. Wake me up when she finally does something is how I felt during this season. Yeah, she's the breaker of chains and all that stuff, but she doesn't have Jorah to listen to, but like she's fine. Barristan Selmy dies during this season, which I thought was a stupid decision. They didn't really have to kill him off, but they just did because they're like, well, so we have to show that there's consequences to Daenerys fighting over in Essos and that like it's a dangerous place and she has to go through some sort of like turmoil in order to conquer and persevere, and that's how they use Barristan Selmy. They basically killed him off to say everything hasn't always been rosy for Daenerys over across the narrow sea. But overall, the season just lacked anything fun or good or satisfying happening. Like everything that happened Jon getting like the main moments of the season are like Jon getting killed, Cersei doing like the walk of shame, Daenerys uh, kind of trying to meet up with Jorah and Tyrion at the end, but that not really happening, and then her basically just like being a queen and showing what she can be like as queen. The death of Barristan Selmy was big, I suppose. Arya. Arya and Sansa. I forgot to mention them, and Littlefinger, I suppose. So Littlefinger and Sansa are in the Vale. Littlefinger kills off Lysa Arryn, and he basically takes over as Lord Protector of the Vale, so he's in charge there now. Sansa's basically just sitting around the Vale for a while, and then she basically gets sold to Ramsay Bolton, and he has his way with her, and that's really unenjoyable. Um, and then as far as Arya, she's doing the whole faceless men thing, and I really hate that plot line, so I can't really vouch for that. And so yeah, nothing very good happens at that part. Moving on to season 3, the big fun moments for this are, of course, the Reigns of Castamere episode where the Red Wedding happens. And besides that, let's see here to cover quickly. Jaime's on the road with Brienne back to King's Landing. Tyrion is now just kind of sitting around, and he has to marry Sansa because that's what Joffrey tells him to do. And he doesn't have sex with her because he's a good guy, but still he's married to Sansa for some reason. Joffrey kind of dumps Sansa and goes for Marjorie Tyrell instead. Cersei's going to be almost married off to Loras Tyrell by Tywin. Tywin's bopping around doing his thing. The War of Five Kings is basically concluded by this point, and he's handed the king. But the Robb Stark dying is the big thing. Arya and the Hound meeting up and becoming the dynamic duo is kind of a fun plot line. Sansa's still complaining a lot in King's Landing. Jon Snow is meeting Ygritte and getting it on in a cave. That's pretty cool. But again, not as great. Not great. It's okay, but I never really cared that much one way or another about Ygritte. And then you've got the plot lines like, let's see here. We've got Catelyn Stark, who obviously gets killed at the Red Wedding too, because ultimately Robb Stark was a fool for not marrying the Frey girl, and so Walder Frey worked with Roose Bolton, who was like the second in charge of the Northern Army, and then with Tywin Lannister to get Robb Stark executed, along with his mom and a few other people like his wife and I think his grandpa too. Catelyn Stark's father. Oh wait, no, Catelyn Stark's father's dead, but her brother got captured, and he's indefinitely in prison. Let's see here. Anything else big that happened during this season? Daenerys is accruing an army still, which seems to be what she's doing in every season besides seasons 1 and 7. So yeah, she does that thing where she says Dracarys, and the dragons kill that evil guy that she was calling her an idiot and all that stuff. But really nothing that big. We get introduced to Daario, who is like her personal assassin, I guess, and he's an alright character, but still nothing super interesting. As far as Littlefinger in this season, I think I don't really remember what he's doing, but I think he's working with the Lannisters still, kind of trying to work his way up. But again, nothing huge with him. As far as Theon Greyjoy, he's being captured and tortured by Ramsay Snow at this point. He's not a Bolton yet, he's a Snow. And that's somewhat interesting, but not super cool to me. So that's all I really got for season 3. A season that I think a lot of people think is like one of the best, but I think take out the Red Wedding episode, and that's like one of the most mediocre seasons, probably down there with season 2 for me as far as like consequential things happening. Just like besides the Red Wedding, which is one of the best episodes of the show, but like the other 9 just are pretty uninteresting to me. Moving up here to the middle season of the show, season 7, which I think a lot of people also think should be higher. But to me, season 7, they go a lot more away from the books in that it's more like a movie feel, and that people travel the whole from like the north all the way to the south. They travel that in like the course of half an episode. Whereas in season 1, it took Tyrion like 5 episodes to get from one place to another, north to south, or even the Vale to just King's Landing. It took him like half a season to get from there to there. But now people are doing that in like less than an episode. Especially Daenerys going from Dragonstone, which is pretty south, all the way up to Beyond the Wall. So that just proves that the show is shifting a little bit. I feel like the writing for certain characters has gotten worse. Tyrion, definitely, his writing has gotten worse. His whole idea to catch a white and bring it to the Cersei, that was a super dumb plan for a really smart character. Um, Jon Snow is really cool in this season, the him and Daenerys interaction. It's really cool to see Daenerys finally in Westeros and pillaging and stuff. Um, Jaime has an interesting character arc development in that he kind of turns against Cersei a little bit. It's cool to see him march on the Tyrells and destroy them at one point. Let's see here. Other plot lines. Sansa is not really. Well, I don't really like the whole plot line with her and Arya and Littlefinger in the north because I feel like they really dumbed down Littlefinger just for the whole point of killing him off at some point. But overall, I think that they don't really know what to do with her character anymore because like Jon is probably going to be the one in charge of everything. So she's just kind of sitting around. Arya killed off Walder Frey at the beginning of season 7, loved it, but besides that, her and Winterfell didn't really like that story all that much. I like that the Hound is back and doing his thing with the Brotherhood without banners, but really, his character's kind of been thrown to the side too. The problem with season 7 is that really the only characters that really seem to matter all that much are like Jon and Daenerys and Cersei and the Night King, and that seemed to be all that like really mattered. So then like other characters like Samwell Tarly, nothing that he did was really of consequence, or Arya and Littlefinger and Sansa. The problem that the season 7 strikes up with the show is that when you introduce the idea of the White Walkers being now the White Walkers are the main threat. Like who really, like Jon at one point points out, like who cares who sits on the throne if the White Walkers kill us all? And that's what the problem with this season is that the main bread and butter of when Game of Thrones is at its best is when the political side of it, the more like the House of Cards side, where people are really conniving and backstabbing each other to get on the throne. That's when Game of Thrones is at its best. Whereas season 7 is more of a fantasy show, and from that perspective it doesn't do as well, in that there's no like political intrigue, and that it's like we got to kill this thing that's going to destroy the world. And I have kind of a gripe with when the main antagonist is like the thing that's going to destroy the world, because you almost kind of know that like for sure they're going to beat it. So that's my main gripe with that. Another gripe with the season is um, they don't have a lot of interesting deaths at all. Like the main death of the season, you could argue is like Thoros of Myr, who isn't interesting whatsoever, and is really just a side character. And so really to me there's not much like there's no it doesn't feel like there's consequences to the season. Like a lot of cool stuff happens, but it feels like it's not grounded anymore like it used to be, which I liked. So these top 3 right here, they're all almost interchangeable for me. I really struggled to place them, but I am just going to go through them and you can disagree with me, but these are for sure the top 3, but the order could change based on my mood or based on the day. So coming in next is season 4, which I liked a lot because it's basically Tyrion's season. We get to see his trial, the murder of Joffrey, which people are accusing him of. His trial is one of the best episodes of the show overall. Um, Seeing the trial by combat with Oberyn and the mountain is really interesting, and then his escape is really cool. His scenes with Tywin and Shay at the end when he kills them both are really cool. Let's see here. Tywin Lannister is in full jerk mode, where he's basically the king in this season because Tommen just keeps relieving his duties to Tywin. So Tywin's essentially the king during this season, and you just see him with power is kind of a dangerous thing in that he seems a lot more evil during this season with all the power. But his character is really interesting, and just the him and Tyrion dynamic. Jon is, let's see here, what's he doing? Oh, up at the wall you have Jon, who eventually leaves Ygritte, goes back to the Night's Watch, and then they have the Battle of Castle Black, which is one of the best episodes of the show in my opinion. And then at the end of season 4, he gets voted like leader of the Night's Watch, which is cool. So his plotline is pretty interesting during this season. Arya and the Hound are a really good plotline during this season, and eventually the confrontation with Brienne of Tarth is really interesting, where they kind of battle her. Jaime gets back to King's Landing, is kind of just doo-bopping around with his one hand. He rapes Cersei during this season over Joffrey's dead corpse, which is pretty creepy, but he doesn't really have much to do during this season. Let's see here. Sansa Stark is still just she's been they've brought her to, I think, the Vale at this point. She's hanging out with Lysa Arryn, so you know she's just hanging out there, kind of stirring up some drama with Littlefinger and Lysa, but nothing really of consequence or interesting. Let's see here. Just the Tyrion stuff is the main thing for me. Daenerys is still across the sea trying to gather more of an army. What else is new, sort of, is my take on that. But the King's Landing stuff is the most interesting. The Tywin, Cersei, Tyrion dynamic. The Lannisters are at their height of interest this season to me. Um, Nothing that interesting is happening with Theon. I think he's still getting tortured and being called Reek, and Ramsay is, or actually the Boltons take over as Wardens of the North during this season, and Ramsay becomes a Bolton instead of a Snow. Let's see here. Other stuff that happens season 4. I can't remember. I know that we've kind of covered the bases here. I'm trying to think of anything else big that happens. Oh, Stannis. Stannis is kind of has his leg between his tails still after failing at Battle of Blackwater Bay, but he is headed north during the end of season 4, and he helps them take down the Wildling army that's led by Mance Rayder. So that's an interesting part that he ends up going north. But overall, nothing huge. But yeah, this season the Tyrion stuff is some of the best of the whole show. Arguably, the courtroom scenes are some of the best scenes of the whole show to me. Coming in as my second best season of Game of Thrones, I have season 1. I think that season 1 gave us everything that we could want in this show. You get a little bit of the fantasy stuff, and that you got some White Walker action. You got the dire wolves, which are kind of like mystical wolves, and but I think what the show does best and what's most interesting is a political drama in a medieval setting, which is what all of season 1 is, especially like episodes 7 through 10. You get to see the start of the War of Five Kings with Robb declaring the North free from the rest of the country. You get Ned Stark, which I love Ned Stark's character. You get his sort of like him being a detective, trying to figure out how Jon Arryn died and figuring out the whole incest plotline and the kids being Cersei and Jaime's, and he's basically just being like a noir detective during the season, and he gets his own. It's basically a mystery. Is the plot of season 1 is figuring out all this mysterious stuff, and then once it gets uncovered, you get this great political drama with Littlefinger offering Ned deals, Varys offering Ned deals, Cersei offering Ned deals, and ultimately Ned going away from all that and saying, "No, I'm going to do it my way," and try and get Stannis on the throne, and that really backfiring on him, and then just the political dynamics of how like everybody just I think it isn't clear until like episode 9 just how carefully everything was holding on in this country, and then just the death of one king, and boom, the country's in complete civil war. And so all to see all that unfold is interesting. To just get introduced to all our characters for the first time is really fun, and so I love this season. The season that I think is best though is season 6. I think you got the best 2 episode stretch in the whole show when you got the Battle of the Bastards and then the season 10 finale where Cersei blows up the Sept. You see the death of, in 1 second, Kevan Lannister, Mace Tyrell, Loras Tyrell, Lancel Lannister, the High Septon, and you get the death of Marjorie Tyrell, which is probably the biggest of all those. Let's see here, what else you got going on? Tommen Baratheon commits suicide in that episode. In episode 9, you have the Battle of the Bastards, which is a great episode. You get to see Jon take on Ramsay and defeat him. The Jon resurrection is pretty interesting, and I like the moment where Jon executes like all those guys like Alistair Thorne and Ollie, and then he says, "My watch has ended." And I like when episode 10 he gets declared King of the North. That's a really awesome part. We get to find out in this season that Jon Snow is actually a Targaryen, which is really cool. He's actually the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, so he's actually the one who is in line for the Iron Throne. So that's really cool. Actually, maybe that's season 7, excuse me. But we do find out that Jon is a Targaryen, but a little bit more. I think we do find out that he is technically the heir to the Iron Throne. The whole R plus L equals J thing. That's finally confirmed. As far as Daenerys at the end of the season, well, she takes back Jorah eventually, I think, and then she gets Tyrion as her hand of the king, and then Varys is also an advisor, and then they all eventually at the end of the season head over to Westeros. So finally, they head over to Westeros. Um, Sansa is just bopping around with Theon, and eventually she ends up at Winterfell, and Jon Snow and her reconnect, but they were never really that close. But besides the point. So I just love season 6. Some of the best episodes, especially 9 and 10 for me. And of course, the Hound coming back, who is my favorite character on the whole show. He gets his whole episode, basically, like episode 7, where we get to see how he came back and that he's still alive. That's super cool. And Arya is kind of a throwaway character this season, but we finally get Bran being an interesting character too, which is really nice and refreshing. Jaime actually has some stuff to do in that he does the whole thing with the Blackfish at River Run with the Tully household, so that's interesting. And yeah, it's just a really cool season. And as I say, seasons 1, 4, and 6 could be in any of the top 3 order for me. But to recap quickly, going from worst to best, I have season 2, season 5, season 3, season 7, season 4, season 1, and season 6. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Comment below if you have something to say or agree or disagree with me. And I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.